Thanks for taking the time to come speak with me today. I was really interested to talk to you because mainly because of two reasons. One, because you completed a PhD, so you basically left the path of academia and done something else. And that something else is something called R for the rest of us. And I would love to hear kind of more about your background and what led you to R for the rest of us, mainly from the journey after academia. If you could just kind of give like a little overview of that.
Sure. Um, yeah, so let's see. It's actually I'm thinking back and I'm realizing it's not totally cut and dry because um I was a I ended up doing my PhD. I finished it in I think it was 2014. I went to UC San Diego, did a PhD in anthropology, but we actually
Mm,
left, my wife and I left San Diego in 2013 to move to Portland where we live now. And I was actually teaching for that year at a small liberal arts college here called Lewis and Clark. Um, so I hadn't actually, the reason I mentioned that is because I hadn't actually finished my PhD at that point. I was still working on it. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, so it wasn't super direct. I mean, also I never thought that I would be doing R, like teaching people to use R. That was never the plan. But after I did a year at Lewis and Clark, and then finished my PhD, I worked at a foundation in Portland called the Oregon Community Foundation, worked in their
I
kind
see
of
that.
research and evaluation department doing helping non like non helping to helping the foundation to measure how effective the grant making they did was. And at that point, I mean, I know you're going to ask how much I used R in grad school. The funny answer is never.
Cool.
Um, Everybody assumes I did, but I actually never did in grad school because I did an entirely qualitative PhD dissertation, and I worked
Mm,
on some mixed methods projects, but those were with other people who were using R, so I never had to.
uh,
But so at the Oregon Community Foundation, I was just using Excel and like got pretty good at Excel. And then I left that job and I was working as a consultant doing what's called evaluation work, which is basically like applied social science research for nonprofit education government. And was using Excel there and just kind of got tired of it, and
yeah,
wanted to teach myself something. So taught myself R.
absolutely. And like during that transition, like were there any? Well, sorry. During that transition, were there any like motivators that made you want to kind of pursue something else? And what did you learn during that transition?
Yeah, I was a little fed up with academia, to be honest, as I'm sure is pretty common. Let's see. So I had a visiting professorship, or yeah, I was visiting faculty for a year, and then they hired a tenure track person. I applied for it, didn't get it. And I just could see like the job market was not that good, especially like in anthropology, not that good. And my wife and I had moved to Portland and decided we wanted to stay here. So at that point, it just didn't really make sense to try to continue an academic career, especially because I was a little bit kind of ambivalent about trying to stay in academia anyway. Um, so yeah, it just kind of made sense to look for something else at that point.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common with a lot of other PhDs I've talked to. Just
Hmm.
yeah, and so before we actually kind of get more discussion about R and like its uses, I was wondering if you could maybe explain just in like how you understand it, what R is for people unfamiliar, maybe people who are like qualitative primarily and kind of interested maybe in using it.
Yep. Yeah, so R, I mean, it's a programming language, but typically
Mm,
I refer to it, I explain it to people as like kind of high-powered Excel, which honestly probably sells it short, but
mhm,
I like to find something that people can kind of, grasp onto that they're already familiar with. So it was developed originally as a language to do statistical analysis. I very much do not do statistical analysis. I'm a qualitative researcher by training. I mean, I do like the basic in terms of stats when it comes to R, calculating like
Like descriptive.
percent, all descriptive statistics, percents, counts, that kind of means, medians, that type of thing. Nothing more complicated than that.
Mm.
And it's a little hard to explain to people if they've never used it, but what I try to tell people is that R in many ways actually is a workflow tool, at least for me, more than it is a tool for any kind of like hardcore quantitative analysis. I talk, well, a lot about there's this idea of reproducible reporting. So you can use, R has tools called R Markdown or Quarto, which enable you to kind of combine text alongside code to be able to produce, documents really quickly. So the contrast that I give is if you've ever done any kind of work where you're getting your data, making charts in Excel, say, then you copy them into Word, and then you have to kind of like redo it every time you want to do a new report. R allows you to write the code for that one time. Whenever you have new data, you just rerun your code and you make your reports. So that's that when I talk about it as a workflow tool, that's largely what I'm referring to.
So is that primarily what you like about ours, is like this workflow? Because I'm kind of curious if you tried other like other programming languages like Python, and like do you see any like major differences between the two? Like because I kind of know like the data types can be a little different, like the actual jargon and the type of code that you use is a little different. But I'm just kind of curious, like what sticks out to you, why R is better than what anything else you've used?
Yeah, I've never used Python. People always ask me that, and I'm like, sorry, I've just never used it. I've never
Yeah.
felt the need to. Um, from what I've heard, though, R is by far the most accessible for kind of non-programmer types. So I don't know if you would agree with that. I don't know. Have you used Python?
I've used both. Yeah, I've used R in grad school. It was like political science courses. So yeah, it
Uh,
was a lot of descriptive and some inferential stats. But yeah, I did a lot of data viz because that was kind of like I forgot what is the package called that people always use in R?
is ggplot.
Yeah, ggplot. Yeah, I use a lot of ggplot. Yeah, and I've used Python, but I feel like I use Python more. But I think it's mainly
Mm,
just because I see a lot of other industry folks use it.
yeah.
But I think it really kind of depends your specialty too. Like if you're specifically in data science or UX, seems like they sometimes lean towards R. A lot of SEO folks I talk to who are interested in like more data type of things are using Python. So I think it
Uh-huh.
really just depends like your specialty.
Yeah, and I mean the types of folks that I tend to work with are, I mean, some of them are in academia or like coming out of academia, and I think R is again like relatively easy, I shouldn't say easy, relatively straightforward in terms of a language to pick up. Um, there's a thing called the tidyverse, which is like an approach for working within R that I think makes it much simpler than what's called base R. Um, I've also just heard with Python, like in terms of like package
So
management and versions, all that stuff.
that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
no,
just
that
heard people talk about that as a nightmare in Python. And that's like not really an issue in R for the most part.
yeah, I will say it's like easier to kind of start up, especially with like R Studio to like kind of just get
Hmm.
started with Python. Yeah, you got to get your environment set up and everything else. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
I could definitely see that. And
Yeah.
maybe you can speak to this too. Like, why do you think like R is popular in academia? Like, is there something historical about it, or is it just do you see? Is it just workflow that you mentioned? I'm just kind of curious in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know totally. Like I said, I never actually used it when I was in academia. But I know it was a language that was developed by academics. And so, just thinking about like the kind of networks where it's spread, would make sense that it's spread within other academics. Um, that's my guess, but I don't actually really kind of know for sure.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. And so after you kind of learned R, you found all these different use cases. eventually, so my understanding is you eventually created a website arc for the rest of us, and I'm
Yep.
assuming there's like some like consulting elements in play, also like a course as well that maybe a someone new to ARC could take. So can you
Mhm.
maybe speak more to the website and how it eventually translated into like a book?
Yep. Yeah, so I started Art for the Rest of Us in 2019.
Yeah.
Um, and initially it was just doing education. So
Mhm.
um, I was developing online courses, helping people like starting out with R. Actually at that time, I mean, that was right before COVID. I did some in-person workshops like that fall. I flew around to various cities in the US and Canada and did in-person workshops.
Wow.
Um, but obviously then COVID hit and that was the end of in-person workshops for a while. So yeah, then I started a thing called R in 3 months, which is sort of like a boot camp for people looking to learn R. That's a big thing that we do now. It happens twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. Um, and then, over the years I had been thinking like maybe I should write a book.
Mhm.
Um, and it was about 2.5 years ago that actually, well, 3 years ago when I started getting serious about it, started reaching out to some publishers, seeing like what it might look like. Well, I even thought about self-publishing for a number
Mhm.
of reasons. I decided to go with a traditional publisher, and then worked on it for 2.5 years. And yeah, it just came out last month. So the book hopefully kind of builds on the courses. It's a different format. Obviously, the courses are mostly video based. So some people like that. Some people want the book, more like the
Mhm.
more just reading. So yeah, hopefully they can both help people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do wonder, in terms of like a book, like do you have a specific audience, just people completely new to art? Maybe
Mhm.
is there an academic audience in mind? Is there like a professional audience in mind? Maybe hobbyists? I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I, I wouldn't necessarily, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say like one kind of segment, because I
Mm.
don't, initially when I started doing this, I mostly actually worked with people in evaluation, um, because that's the world that I had worked in immediately before starting Art for the Rest of Us. But at this point, it's super like the people that I work with are in all different industries. So it's intended to be broad in that sense. I tell people that the book is intended either for people totally new to R, or people with some experience in R who want to learn to use R in new ways. And um, because what I've realized, I used to have a lot of insecurity about the way that I use R because I was like, I don't do any kind of like inferential statistics. Not, I just do like descriptive stats. But then I realized a lot of the things that I do, like I do a lot of data visualization.
Mm.
That's unique, or not unique, but like there aren't, a lot of people who are doing hardcore stats and are not as gifted when it comes to the data viz side of things. So you know, I hope the book can show people like the idea behind the book is to highlight a range of things that R can do,
Yeah.
and help people think about it as more than just a tool for statistics. So again, I hope like existing R users will pick it up and see new ways that they might consider using R.
Yeah, because I kind of see it as about how to do storytelling, but like in with a different tool rather than just maybe
Hmm.
using Excel. Because I do know like with ggplot, there's a lot of like pretty interesting like different types of like just designs that you can use within it. So
Right.
there's like you definitely can see like a way of just storytelling. And I know like in terms of like career transitioning, in terms of people that want to use art for like a career, maybe outside of academia or just people that never been in academia. But to be successful, like, are there any other hard skills that you would suggest that pair well with R? I'm kind of assuming maybe like Excel would be a good tool to learn, but are there anything else you'd recommend?
I don't know. I mean, I do think like the thing with learning R is you have to have kind of an understanding of quantitative data and how it works. For
Mm.
example, when I teach people to use R, I assume that they know, different data types. So like, is this data in this column numeric, or is it character, or whatever? And so, if you are thinking about R, but you're like, oh, I've never done anything in that area, I would definitely think, let me get kind of up to speed on just kind of general skills working with quantitative data. And I think Excel can be a good bridge too. I mean, that was my bridge. That's how I got to R. But I also think, I mean, this is anecdotal, but I've definitely talked to a lot of people who have learned R, and it's really helped their careers just in terms of things that it's opened up for them. So yeah, I don't know about so much necessarily about complementary skills, but I will say, I mean, this is obviously, I have a self-interest in this, but I think learning R has a ton of potential benefit for people.
Absolutely. And like, do you feel that R is like, I know you talk about just like how you educate others about it. But let's say you were like you just learned R, well, not just learned R, but you learned R and then you join a team of people that's never used it before. Do you
Hmm,
think it's easier to like kind of translate your knowledge to other people? Like, do you think it's a tool that will work well in like collaborative spaces, like that eventually people will learn? Because I know like with Excel, it's just everyone already knows Excel, but to me, like,
right.
how do you kind of spread R in different workplaces that people may not be familiar with? And maybe there isn't any. Maybe I, maybe I'm wrong
Yeah.
there. But I'm just kind of curious, like, how you spread R to different people,
I mean, I've
just knowledge
seen
of
that
it.
because, right, I work with several teams who have transitioned to R, and I think there's some nice ways I've seen some of them do this. So some of them will have like I don't know, bi-weekly meeting where either in person or virtually, the idea is like any R questions that you have, you bring them to that meeting and discuss them. And having someone who's more advanced is really helpful there, because someone, less advanced might be like, hey, I'm trying to make this plot and I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong. And that more advanced person then can help them. So I think, you know, setting setting up structures like that is really helpful. Um, I also think as much as possible early on, working with real data is really important. Like in this R in 3 months program we do, the teaching materials obviously have to use a generic data set because there has to be something that everybody can work with. But we also then have a piece of it where people are working with their own data and doing assignments with their own data. And I think it's just so much easier for other people kind of to really see the power of R if they're doing things that doing something with their own data. Um, the one other
Absolutely.
thing, this might be a bit more advanced than what you're thinking, but like
Mhm.
we work with some teams. We've made custom R packages. So for
Oh, yeah.
example, we've made packages for teams that have a what's called a ggplot theme. So that's like a just a one line of code that they can apply to all of their plots, and it makes them all look on brand. Um, and
Actually pretty
giving
neat.
people, what's that?
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Like, and I was gonna say, I don't know if you define maybe what a package is, but
Sure.
yeah, I
So
don't know if you.
yeah, I mean, a package is, because R is open source, there's like the built-in tools of R, and people refer to that as base R, and that's like the core code that makes up R. But again, because it's open source, people can write their own code to have R do any number of things. And when people write code and kind of package it up, that's what's called a package. And there are packages on what's called CRAN, which is the official, I guess, official place where you can like most easily access packages that other people have made. So I talked before about like the tidyverse, which is a collection of packages used for data import, wrangling, data viz. But then anybody can make a package. And I actually have a chapter in my book that talks about making your own package. And we've seen teams that have made their own packages and having things like a custom theme enables less advanced users to pretty easily apply that theme and make all their plots on brand in ways that, if they had to write that code from scratch, like there's no way they would, but if they can just write, theme Omni to give the name of one of our clients, then it's pretty straightforward.
So if people are interested about learning more about R, either through the website or your book, firstly, like how would they even find this? Is the R for the Rest of Us selling anywhere? Is it on Amazon? Somewhere
Yep.
outside of Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can buy it directly from the publisher. They're called No
Mhm.
Starch.
Yeah.
If you go, so on there's also a free online version of the book. If you go to
Mhm.
book.artfortherestofus.com, you can actually read it for free.
Okay.
It also has links at the top of every page to if people want to buy an actual copy. But
Nice.
yeah, it's available widely.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for taking the time again. And I just want to leave the floor open just for like a final question of, do you have anything else maybe that we missed? Anything maybe about leaving academia or just your journey in general? For those that are interested about like careers outside of academia, maybe something you could speak to that on.
Yeah, I will say one thing that people often ask me, because now I work for myself, and people
Mhm.
are like, oh, I want to, I'd love to get out of academia and like work for myself. But I think usually you have to go through an intermediate step of working for someone else. Like I wouldn't have even known about R had it not been for the last two jobs that I had before I did this. So while it might be tempting to think, oh, let me just start my own thing, in a lot of cases, I think having like getting a regular 9 to 5 job, seeing what some of the pain points are can really be useful if you do want to do your own thing long term.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, I feel like you really just have to learn by observing, and I think you can do
Mm,
that certainly by like just seeing how organizations work. So,
right.
yeah, especially in my field, like SEO, like you can't like really consult people if you haven't really worked with the business to actually do it.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Totally.
makes total sense.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm gonna let you go, but again, thank you
Okay.
for taking the time to talk with me on with after PhD. So,
Yeah.
thank you.